Okay, we made it up the trail. Barely. It was pretty steep. This is St. Mary's Glacier behind me. And it's technically a permanent snowfield, but it's a beautiful little lake and pine forest. So I'm gonna do some sketching with watercolor and gouache today. Okay, so what did we bring today? Let's see. This is a really awesome little thing that I got at REI. It's just a little seat. It's insulated and waterproof, which is going to save me a lot of pain in the future. So I will. Ooh, oh my god, it's kind of steep right here. This was probably why I was so tired coming up here, because I brought all my gouache. I probably only needed like 3 of these, but I just wanted to have fun today, do whatever I wanted. I brought a few sheets of paper. Some of them are just kind of scrap paper, and a little hardboard to paint on, as well as my plein air painting sketchbook. Of course, the watercolor palette. Water brushes, very convenient. And a couple little watercolor postcards. So let's get started. Okay, so I did a little watercolor warm-up, but now I think I'm gonna do some gouache. This is my little desk, laptop desk. I think I'm gonna use my sketchbook and then maybe jump into some bigger paper with gouache. So one thing that I've been doing, even though I've only used gouache like a handful of times, I learned pretty quickly that they dry out really fast on my palette. So what I do is put a paper towel down, and then I pretty much just drench it in water. I mean, don't have to drench it, just get it wet, get it pretty damp. And that's going to allow me to use my gouache for at least a half an hour before it gets kind of tacky. It's Colorado, and I'm up at about 10,000 feet, so it's definitely going to dry out really fast up here. And since I forgot a little cup for water, I'm hopefully not going to use too much water anyway, but I'm going to fill my little watercolor palette with a little bit of water, and really hope that I don't get clumsy and spill it all over myself, which I have done in the past. So I'll maybe set it there. And based on the colors that I'm looking at out in the mountain, I'm gonna stick with some more earthy tones. So these are 2 of my favorite colors: permanent deep green and moss green. So beautiful. Probably use some ultramarine light, some navy blue, raw umber, and probably burnt umber. Of course, permanent white.
Bobby, come this way. Please don't interrupt people. Come on. Be sure, guys. We need to go up. We need to follow Daddy. This is a fun day. It's a fun day. It's fine. It's beautiful. Give me your hand.
Just a little bit of each one to start off. I'll probably figure out real quick which one I'm going to go through faster. if you've seen my work, a lot of my landscapes, you probably realize that I tend to, I'm going to add some burnt sienna too. I like to exaggerate my colors or use unrealistic palettes, but today I'm going to try to be a little realistic with this, at least the first sketch. We're going to use this brush, and sorry, leaning down, my bigger one. All right, this was the most recent one I did. That was at Rocky Mountain National Park, which was really fun. I think, you know, what might be cool is doing this left page with this more realistic color palette, and then maybe if I feel like it on the right side, doing something a little more stylized. So based on the view, it's kind of a, I like adding more of a warm undertone. So I'm just going to get my brush wet, a little bit of brown umber, and I'm going to lay in some large wash of this warm tone. And this is a Moleskine watercolor sketchbook, which is pretty absorbent, so I tend to use a little bit more water on my first wash. And not too concerned with getting it super even because, you know, as you know, the world around us is not perfectly uniform, especially out in nature. We have a lot of shifts in colors and shadows and everything, so it kind of lends itself to landscapes. Now I'm going to switch to my smaller brush, making sure I have all of this in view for you guys. And this is definitely gonna dry way faster than down in Denver. I'm about 5,000 feet higher than I usually am, which sucks the moisture out of everything. So I don't have to wait too long for this to dry. And I'm gonna lay in some of my cooler tones that I see in the greenery and the all of the shrubbery and trees growing around the lake on the opposite side. And for this, I'm definitely just going to use very broad brush strokes, not getting too detailed at this point. Right now I'm mostly just worried about creating, filling in some bigger chunks of color that I see over on the horizon. Oh my gosh, mosquito! What? Hopefully I don't like fling everything when I try to escape the mosquito's wrath. I'm kind of keeping in mind that there's a huge snowfield dropping down into the mountain, into the valley. So that's going to be about right here. So I don't need to fill in too much of that. Plus, up here, it tends to get a little more rocky anyway. So there's a few shadows of some big rocks kind of cascading down the mountain. At first, when I start these paintings, I am so not worried about perfection, and I rarely am worried about perfection anyway, but at this point I'm just kind of, I'm staring more at the landscape than at my painting, and trusting my eye to tell me where the majority of colors are, what direction my brush strokes might go in. And this is all just kind of like laying the groundwork for the rest of the painting. I'm used to doing this in watercolor, so I'm constantly thinking about where my highlights are. But this is gouache, it's opaque, so we don't need to do that, which I have to really remind myself of constantly. This is kind of scooping around towards me on the left side. see. There's a like light colored shore over there. I can hear someone playing music in the distance. Acoustic guitar. It's kind of interesting. Adds a unusual atmosphere to my wilderness experience. Although this is definitely a more popular hike, a more popular trail. Mosquito. No. I have been bitten by mosquitoes so much lately on my hikes. It must be that time of year. And even at this high elevation, they still find me. I haven't used much white. I'm going to start adding a little bit of white for some areas. Right now I'm just kind of imagining how this green clump of shrubs and grasses or whatever they are, ground cover, are crawling up the mountain. Sorry, if you see the camera jerk, it's because I'm swatting away a mosquito. It's just one. It's just like haunting me right now, scaring me into thinking it's gonna attack. Ah. Although I could probably avoid. I could have wore. I don't like wearing bug spray. I do have some essential oils that help, but I forgot them because I didn't expect bugs. I'm gonna start building up some more contrast in my shrubbery. So off in the distance you can see it kind of varies. It goes like light green, dark green. There's a little bit of almost a blue tone in some of the shadows. I'm mixing my blue and all my brown tones together for some of the shadows. So I'm not using black, but it gives the illusion of black almost, but more interesting because it has a little bit of color. I think it's a little more of a natural way of doing shadows. And it's going to be really fun when I start doing the highlights, because that's when everything really pops. But at first, definitely more concerned with getting the overall composition started. The shoreline over there. My brightest point that I'm looking at is the sky, which is pretty much not going to be in this painting. The snowfield / glacier, as they call it, and the reflection of the glacier in the water. Otherwise, I'm mostly playing with like some neutral tones, this raw umber mixed with other colors. And I can add a few pops of highlight to some rocks on the shoreline, which will help with the contrast, but there's people behind me. All right, don't want to spend a really long time on this one. I want this one to be my warm-up, so I'm trying to remind myself to be more intuitive and not so careful and controlling. Now, some of these rocks cascading down the hill are definitely highlighted. So I'll start off with a little mixture of my burnt umber, raw umber, and white, and kind of let it mix and flow on the canvas as I put it down. I wish I could show both the view and the painting for you guys, but I don't have a tripod, or maybe I'll figure out a good setup sometime for that. Oh wow, those people are singing, playing guitar off in the distance, so loud. It's kind of echoing around the valley. I absolutely love when you can see brush strokes in a painting. That's like something I'm always trying to work on and remember to have visible in my paintings. And gouache I'm learning very quickly that gouache is excellent for showing those textures and really revealing the artist's hand in the painting, and I'm kind of in love with it. All right, gonna switch over to my water area, just start to fill that out. I'm mostly gonna use my permanent green and my indigo just to start off. Oh my gosh, it's not a mosquito flying around me, but it's some kind of buzzy bee sound, and it's kind of freaking me out. If I didn't have all this stuff on my lap, I would probably be like flailing my arms around, which would end up being worse. Now I'm going to use a little less water and start doing some of the textures I see on the surface of the water. This is just, I'm using my brush kind of parallel with the canvas, creating a dry brush stroke. So again, it's like not really any water on my brush, just pigment. And it naturally finds the ridges on the paper, naturally creates this rough tone, which is great because the water is a little bit rough today. It has a rough surface. It's not super reflective. And there's like all sorts of tones happening in the surface of the water. It's definitely not just blue or just one color. Sorry, I have to like lean sideways when I'm doing this, otherwise I don't get a long brush stroke, although I guess I could tilt my page rather than myself. This is the first time I've really done plein air painting in the wild, especially with liquid gouache. Sorry, the first time I've done gouache plein air painting with my liquid gouache. I've done one other plein air painting with gouache, but it was like a pan palette, so it wasn't tubes of paint. It was already dried cakes of gouache, and it was super easy to throw in my bag, and it was much more like painting with watercolors. And it was kind of a good intro for gouache for me, but I far prefer this doing this with my liquid gouache, because liquid gouache is just so luxurious and wonderful. Okay, I'm gonna go up now and do the snow coming down, because that's gonna show me where to do the reflection in the water. So I'm just getting pretty much pure white for this because this is bright. Pretty much my brightest point in the painting. Hello, birdies. There is a little bit of shadow on the glacier snow, so I'm going to add a tiny bit of my blue, ultramarine blue. And then I can come back in and reduce that a little bit with more white, pure white, which will help make it look like a snowy texture. So my brush is definitely too wet for that dry brush. There's also like a few small fingers of snow kind of coming up to the right side. Basically, I'm just imagining how the contours of the land provide like a little, I don't know, bowl for the snow to sit in. And it's definitely pretty rocky up there, so I'm gonna do a little bit of some darker tones, raw umber and burnt umber, especially above the snow. There's some green kind of coming down from the top of the hill. My moss green is nice. Kind of helps subdue that, the green that you see in the permanent green. Especially when I mix it with a little brown. And now I'm just gonna let some of this grass kind of fade down. Because there's all sorts of rocky cliffs up there, and I'm not here to paint every single bush or rock. Mosquito. But I do want to imply a lot of that rocky, rough texture. Oh. Something just flew right past my ear. Bzz. No, thank you. Someday I'll scare away that mosquito. Let's see. Okay, I think after this I'll move to another spot, get a different angle, and maybe find somewhere with less mosquitoes. Maybe if I'm a little more exposed, like out in the wind and out, or not necessarily the wind, but I'm kind of up in the trees right now, and there is a little more moisture here because of the lake or pond, whatever. I guess it's a lake. So there's like all sorts of bugs hanging out up here. But this is just so beautiful, so relaxing. Definitely a fan of longer, more secluded hikes, but sometimes these short trails, these short climbs, you can still find some quiet spots. Like, there are a lot of people around. I would say I could see probably can't see it from here, but I can see probably about 30 people spread out around the lake and up on the trails. There's also a few people skiing up on the snow, which is probably, they're super tiny from here, but so pretty much just creating a little more contrast near the snow to make it really pop. But now that I have that in place, I kind of know a little bit better where I can do my reflection. Though I think I'll add just a tiny bit more snow. Brightness. I was intimidated for so long by gouache. I don't know. I just, especially bringing all of the stuff out into the wilderness with me, like on my hikes. But because today's hike is a little shorter and it was steep and everything, but it was doable. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. I'm glad I didn't chicken out and leave everything in the car, because it is nice to have such freedom. Like, my little watercolor palette gives me so much freedom. I don't have to have like this whole setup going on, and I can jump around the trail and do whatever I want. But this is so enjoyable. Like, it's just very relaxing, and I love learning new mediums, so I'm pretty much in heaven right now. I'm not doing pure white reflection because that would definitely take away my focus, which is pretty much this, and it's definitely not a super reflective lake. Right now you can hardly even see a reflection. It's just very cloudy, and the surfaces of the water is super rough, so there's hardly a reflection. You can basically just see like a shift in value. And since I've sat down, the sun has changed, which happens all the time with plein air painting. So I've had to make some executive decisions. There is I'm gonna add a couple like super rough trees on the left side just to indicate that this is in the foreground. very kind of blocky shapes. All right, pretty much done now. My warm up, which always lasts longer than what I want, but this is really fun. Now the challenge is, or now I'm going to see how well this palette does when I close it up and try to move to a different spot to see if all my stuff is going to be messed up. But that's why I squeezed out such a small amount of paint. I didn't want to waste any in case I had to move suddenly and everything got all messed up. So it's definitely much cloudier now. Okay, I think I'm gonna call this one. That was a really fun sketch. Let's show you guys. I didn't do any of the foreground trees that are closer to me, just to have it focused more on the distance. Okay, but yeah, I could always keep going and doing more, but we're gonna stop and we're gonna move on. So I was sitting up in those trees for the last painting, and I hiked around for a while. It's pretty crowded in this whole area over there, which is the main trail that leads up to the snow. But I decided to go the opposite way and found this cool little outcrop over here by the cliffs. And I thought it might be fun to try painting the rock texture as it goes down into the water. A lot of pretty colors, and when you look close, there's lots of nice reflection in the water, so that'd be a good practice. And as a bonus, this area is like overgrown with the most amazing wildflowers all the way up the hill. Every color. It's just gorgeous. Purples and reds and yellows. There's hummingbirds all over the place, which you can probably hear in the background. Oh my god! A nasty spider! Ew. That made my heart skip a beat. My friends watching this are probably gonna think, how did she not fall over backwards into the water when she saw that? I'm getting braver. So yeah, I think this might be maybe away from the spider den. Maybe down here I can sit and paint this cool view right here. So my gouache survived. My paper towel is still pretty damp, and as you can see, the colors will just continue to bleed. So again, this is why you try not to squeeze out too much, because you don't want to waste a lot of it. And I've refilled my water basin. I'm gonna have this sitting down here, I think. And my brushes. I think I'll do horizontal, I'll kind of make the rocks kind of cascade off into the distance. Just kind of, and I can actually have some good reflections going on. So, yeah. I'm kind of thinking I may only get out a little more white and otherwise just use the rest of my colors here, and hopefully that'll be all I need, and then I won't be wasting a lot more. I bought a bigger tube of the white because I knew I would use a lot of that. And yeah. Again, I think I'm going to start off with like a warmer tone. Oops. Although, I just realized I hardly have any burnt umber left. But maybe I just use burnt umber as the undertone. Raw umber. Maybe I'll just use this as the undertone, and then for the rest of it, my other colors. I can still pick up a decent amount off of the wet paper towel, so sorry, I just realized you couldn't quite see everything I was doing. But this is just a wash, just almost an underpainting. And on top of this, I'll be doing all my other tones. Just a little bit. I don't know if there are fish in the water, but I keep seeing or hearing things flop around. I think there's little fish jumping around. It's kind of cool. Anyways. So I think I'll start off with just a quick sketch and get my bottom of my rocks kind of decide where they're going to be. Sound definitely travels here, and there's a lot of people over on the other shore, so we might be serenaded by more people than usual. I may cut that back in a little bit more. We'll see. I think I'm actually going to start off with my reflections just because I'm excited about it and I think it'll be fun. One of the things that's kind of difficult when you're trying to figure out what colors to use is in all the craziness of the reflection, there's such a variety of colors. There's gradients, there's hard contrasted lines. There's just so much going on. So you can choose to simplify it or, stylize it in whatever way you want. But if you want to be pretty realistic, one thing that helps me is, so I have a reference point for my colors. I hold up something black to the water. So my shirt is black. And by doing that, I can tell how dark my colors I need to be. So when I compare my shirt to the water, I can see there's like actually bright blue all along here. There's browns and greens all up here. And there's actually not a lot that is really dark. The darkest that I can see is actually near the cliff edge, like some of the lower edges of where the water touches. So it's kind of just something that might help. But as I said, I'm gonna use whatever colors I have left on my palette. So my colors are gonna be a little more stylized here. I'm using a slightly transparent, it's just kind of wet. And at first I'm just going to kind of get a rough texture. It's a little green in some areas. I'm using my dry brush again, my dry brush technique, where I am basically holding the brush parallel with the canvas, with the paper, and I'm just sweeping it back and forth. There's definitely like not a lot of water on my brush, so it just comes off as more dry. And as you can see, there's just a plethora of patterns to choose from. You can see into the water, so we can do some sandy tones. I could even draw like some of the rocks that are on the floor, the ground, under the water. Or I can focus more on the reflections that I see. I'll probably do a variety of that. So I'll have like a little bit of my, a little bit more of my raw umber, warmer brown tone towards myself. So the viewer, if I'm right here, if I'm drawing it right here, I can see down into the water, so it's like a lighter sandy tone. So this is a little bit lighter over here. And then about a few feet away from me, the hard reflections start. So I'm just choosing, I'm kind of putting a mixture of my indigo my navy blue and my burnt umber on my brush, and I'm gonna draw some of those more wavy like reflections, I guess, as they go away from me. Something that makes reflections more realistic when you're trying to like have a rough or not a crystal clear surface on the water. Having dark lines, having that contrast lends itself really well to more realistic. I'm like not finishing my sentences, I'm sorry. There's like a lot of little surface tension on back here. There's not a lot that is just a pure reflection. There's a lot of surface motion on the water. And I can come back and I can do more, but I just wanted to start off with something. Okay. There's also some rocks reflecting really close to the edge. So I'll come back and I'll add more of that. But for now, I'm going to move on up into the rocks. So I'm going to choose where I want my focus to be, since if I just do all like high detail, your eye is gonna like just go all over the place and get lost. And I mean, it'll be interesting, but I'm gonna focus more on this section. So there's like a pretty cool edge sticking down into the water right there. So that'll be my main focus. And there's all sorts of like striations in the rock. So I'm just going to sketch in a few so I remember where they are and make sure I don't ignore them. There's kind of a wet edge on the bottom of this. There's little fish jumping. It's so cute. And some of these shadows on the rocks are actually pretty geometric. So this square brush is kind of perfect for the subject matter. I can get some nice geometric hard lines. Behind here, it gets pretty dark. There's lots of clouds forming. It's supposed to be mostly cloudy all day, so I'm not too worried. Didn't say it was supposed to storm, but I'm sure we'll get some Whoa, I don't know if you heard that. There was a fish like right here or something. Frog, fish, I don't know, but it jumped. I'm kind of doing a watercolor mindset to this. I mean, not mindset, but I'm leaving this undertone of the painting as my highlights. So this is exactly how I would approach a watercolor painting. The difference is these pigments are far more opaque, and I can come back in. I can add white if I want, and I can get some highlights wherever I feel like it. It's a little more freedom. I think that's something that I'm really starting to enjoy about gouache. There's like no pressure. The most difficult part is making sure my paint doesn't dry as fast as it tends to. There's so much variation in rock color and texture, and I want to make sure I don't get too crazy off over here in the distance. So I'm gonna use less colors as I get further away. And I'll probably also be a little more loose in the background just because I want my focus to be in the foreground. So I'm using pretty much 3 colors in the background. I'm using burnt sienna, ultramarine, and my white. And between those, I'm just like adding a little water here and there and letting it fade off into the distance, kind of sticking with large blocky shapes. So hopefully in the end, it will look slightly out of focus and just kind of disappear into the distance so that my focus remains over here. We'll see. Honestly, I'm figuring it out as I go. Sometimes I try to make these executive decisions like early on in the painting, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I try to follow my instincts. which just is, it's like you develop over time. The more you do it, the more you kind of know things. You know things. Also, the thing that I'm curious about with gouache is, like, how many layers can I build up before I start taking away the underlayer? Because, you know, it doesn't really seem to cure. You can go back in and you can mess with your colors, like, after the fact, unlike most watercolors and unlike acrylic. So it's a different... So I sometimes wonder, if I imagine I'm building this landscape, I am like the architect of the environment. I lay down a layer of sand, and then I fill this with water, and then I have these blocks rising up out of the water, and these cliffs and the mountains, all of that. Can I paint it in that layered format? Can I paint the sand? Can I then paint water on top of that? Can I paint a block and then add texture to the top as though I'm rendering it in a video game? These are the things I think about when I'm painting. Whoop, got a little green in there. It's okay. It'll sort of fade off anyway. All right. This will be my edge. I'm exaggerating this over here, and I'll come back in with a few highlights to get a little more subdued. Oops. Sometimes I don't pick up any color and I'm like, hey. Okay. Okay, ow. I need to change my foot. Okay, there we go. Leg was falling asleep. Okay, wow. Some loud people over there. I think there's like a high school visiting because there was a huge group of young people and they're quite loud. And wow, that made me sound so old. Ha, youths. Youths. making this up as I go. Like, I know I'm not going to be able to capture every little bit of detail in these rocks, so making more stylized decisions and I guess slightly minimizing the complexity in order to represent it to my own abilities. There's so many like beautiful patterns in the rocks. There's the like striations going up and down, left and right, and there color striations in the rocks themselves as well. So it's kind of fun to decide what I want to add versus leave more minimal and let the viewer's eye kind of wander and make it up. Human eyes are pretty good at filling in the gaps. Like when we look at photos that are slightly blurry, or when we look at paintings that are more minimalistic, our brains know what should be there and we fill it in, and it's kind of, I think that's more fun. But I am using this as an opportunity to practice stone and rock texture, so I want it to look like stone and rock. So just like more of a could see into. Okay, how many times are they going to yodel before they get bored and move on? I'm not cynical at all. I'm just adding little like variation in the surface of the water that's closer to me, so it looks like you're kind of peering through, that you can see through the surface. God. Not too much though, I don't want it to be some darker reflections happening back here. I'm surprised my GoPro has lasted this long. Okay. I think I'm not going to do like go crazy with reflections, but just want to get enough. It is a little darker the further away it gets. Because well, there's also light stones reflecting on the surface, but I don't have enough paper to show that part. Oh my god. Clearly someone is dying in the distance. That's what happens when you go swimming in the wild. Okay, this was really fun. I like this little outcrop that I found slightly away from all the crowds. Though I do apologize if the background noise was annoying. But I think I'm gonna wrap this one up, and I'm actually gonna head back down. I'm gonna leave soon because there's some darker clouds rolling in, and even though I don't think it's gonna storm, it's gonna get windier and colder, so I think this was a really good day of sketching, actually. All right. That was fun. I'm not sure if I'm lining it up correctly. But yeah, thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you guys for joining me today, and I'll see you again soon.